HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Serial Killer's Apprentice, the true story of how Houston's deadliest murderer turned a kid into a killing machine. By Katherine Ramsland and Tracy Ullman. Read by Christina Delaine. Author's Note: This book revisits and revises the story of the Candyman crimes that happened in Houston, Texas during the early 1970s. Dean Corll, an adult, recruited two teenage accomplices, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., to assist him to lure more than 24 other boys for Corll to rape, torture, and murder. Eventually, Henley killed Corll and turned himself in. At this point, he mentioned his fear of Corll's association with a sex trafficking ring in Dallas. Brooks, once in custody, also described the ring. The Houston police made a tepid effort to investigate the alleged connection before ultimately dismissing it. However, such a ring did exist. The evidence for this changes the story that's been told. Documentary maker and investigative journalist Tracy Ullman spent over a decade looking into the traffickers' activities. She contacted Henley, the only accomplice willing to talk, and he agreed to tell what he knew. I, Katherine Ramsland, joined them to explore Henley's experience as Corll's accomplice. I'm the primary author of this book, collaborating with Ullman, who describes the bigger picture of the Corll-Brooks-Henley story from her research. This account is the first time the shocking tale has been given its full context. Henley did not ask for our present-day investigation, but he agreed to help us to better understand the way sexual predators exploit their targets' vulnerabilities. I've communicated with and researched serial killers for more than 25 years. One such offender operated in the town where I grew up. He once picked up a girl on his motorcycle from a spot where I'd recently been hitchhiking. I was a kid. I'd have accepted a ride like that. This man, John Norman Collins, was arrested and convicted of one of the Michigan co-ed murders and suspected in the others. Later, while I was writing for Court TV's Crime Library, I corresponded with Collins. Then I contacted other serial killers. Since then, I've become a specialist on these offenders, writing books and teaching university courses with a focus on the killer's psychological development. In my book, The Mind of a Murderer, I examined a dozen cases from the past century that feature mental health experts who'd spent extended periods of time to learn about the lives and crimes of specific mass, spree, and serial killers. Their efforts paid off in detailed material that offered a model for my own work from 2010 through 2021 with Dennis Rader, the BTK serial killer from Wichita, Kansas. To undertake this in-depth project, I used a format called a guided autobiography. That is, I structured my questions to get responses about Rader's trajectory toward violence that would benefit the fields of psychology, criminology, and law enforcement. The process allowed me to better understand the way someone like Rader experiences his world. We discussed psychological concepts like compartmentalization, or the notion that predators can pass as normal citizens while engaging in serious crimes by partitioning their lives. Rader referred to this ability as cubing through his various life frames. That is, he could alternate his different facades as circumstances required. He could act as a good father and husband, the devout president of his church council, and a Boy Scout volunteer, while he also stalked, stole, and killed. All roles were available to him as sides of his cube, so he could quickly pivot among them. Thus, Rader showed me that cubing is a more instructive concept than that of partitioned roles for understanding how he could live a double life with such dramatic differences. The notion of cubing helped me consider Wayne Henley's experience. Although he got into some minor trouble as a teen, he might never have become criminally violent save for crossing paths with Corll. Despite assisting Corll with murder, when Henley could, he cubed into an ordinary kid, and this part gave him some relief from what he was doing, as well as the courage, finally, to resist. He's the only known accomplice to have killed the predator who lured him into a team killer arrangement. We don't diminish Henley's criminal responsibility, nor does he. Instead, we explored with him the psychological process in the accomplice relationship that offers lessons for counselors, criminologists, parents, and potential future victims. This book is about a predator who lured two vulnerable kids into a criminal enterprise. Both came from broken homes, difficult circumstances, and meager resources. Both were susceptible to financial enticement. David Brooks died in 2020 without fully telling his story. Henley, still alive, presents an opportunity to study the predatory process from the target's perspective. These events happened 50 years ago. What we thought we knew about it back then has shifted with new information. Recently, we've seen other settled cases from earlier decades being altered, even eclipsed, by new interpretations that answer lingering questions or that better address the facts. We can't cling to the 1973 identification of a victim, for example, when a 2012 DNA analysis disproves it, as happened in this case. Staying flexible is how innocent people who were wrongfully convicted have been exonerated. It's how cover-ups have been exposed and cold cases solved. It's also how older cases like this one can give us an important perspective on current conditions. Many of the same grooming techniques that Corll employed are still in use because they are successful. Ullman's research on the trafficking ring during the 1970s that backed up Corll's threats shows its considerable spread at that time around the country. People of influence lost evidence, terminated investigations, and erased associations. But sufficient traces remain to piece together much of the story. Henley hopes to contribute something redemptive from his acts. The many hours of interviews he gave are used in this book, as direct quotes and as omniscient statements about his feelings and his perspective on the events he witnessed. His police statements from August 1973 also offer material, as do Henley's mother and a few of his childhood friends. In addition, we've used police and court records, autopsy reports, news articles, and TV news packages from the relevant time period. Sometimes we relied on items from earlier book-length accounts, but the two primary sources based on the case were published before the accomplices' trials, and both also contain factual errors. Even the district attorney's memoir, in which he discussed the trials, is inconsistent with police reports and other records. This book adds more to the story, digs deeper into accomplice dynamics, and harvests its most urgent lessons about predators for a new generation. Chapter 1. Killing the Candyman. A slender, curly-haired teenage boy in handcuffs and a greenish-blue prison jumpsuit guided the driver of an unmarked police car onto a rutted road. The cop led a short caravan of vehicles carrying detectives toward an L-shaped row of corrugated metal sheds at 4500 Silver Bell Street in Houston, Texas. This was Southwest Boat Storage. They stopped near unit number 11. Men in suits emerged from the lead car. One helped the boy to step out. He looked dazed and could barely stand. The detectives needed this boy. He'd just revealed that Dean Corll, a local electrician whom he'd fatally shot that morning, had killed other boys and buried them in this unit's dirt floor. The detectives had initially dismissed his claims. He was a kid, coming off a paint-sniffing high. But he'd mentioned David Hilligist, Marty Jones, and Charles Cobble. All three had been reported missing. Two had vanished on the same day a few weeks before. Despite the stifling heat on that August afternoon in 1973, they'd come to check out the kid's disturbing claim. Some of these cops were from Houston PD. Some were from nearby Pasadena, Texas, where Corll had been shot. They'd agreed they should work together. Around 5:30 p.m., they approached the boat stall's set of steel doors. A padlock stopped them. They located the facility owner, Mamie Menier, who lived close, and explained why they needed access. She was distressed to hear that her tenant was dead. Dean Corll had been such a nice man, she said, always paying his monthly fee on time ever since he'd rented the stall in November 1970. The landlady had no spare key for Corll's lock, so she granted permission to the officers to break it. One used a tire iron to get the job done. When they opened the doors to the windowless, high-ceilinged 12 by 34-foot space, a blast of pent-up heat pushed them back. Inside, they saw a cluttered stall. They entered to assess the contents. In the center of the space, two musty overlapping carpets covered the dirt floor. The blue one touched both walls and ran about 12 feet into the unit. Along the right side near the back, the detective saw a tarp-covered car, 2 canisters of compressed gas, a small red bike, an empty furniture box, and a plastic bag full of shoes and clothing. They counted 8 20-gallon metal containers. 2 10-pound bags of lime sat on one. Near the left wall, a crack in the lumpy dirt and shell floor exuded a faint odor. 2 short-handed shovels and a broken rake with a white residue on its tines reinforced the ominous impression that something had been buried here beneath lime. The boy who'd brought them here came to the threshold. He looked pale. Instead of entering the stall, he backed away, sat on the grass, and put his head in his hands. His life had changed irreparably that day. 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley, Jr. had just shot and killed Dean Corll. He'd said he'd done it to save himself and 2 friends whom Corll had decided to torture. Then he'd told detectives about the boat stall, with 4, and possibly more, kids buried inside. Pasadena PD Detective Dave Mullican had been with Henley since the shooting that morning. He stared at the forlorn teen. This kid knew more than he was saying, a lot more. He'd led them to the boat stall without difficulty, though he said he'd been there just once. He'd pointed out where the facility owner lived. What else did he know? What else had he done? But these questions could wait. First, they had to discover if Dean Corll was the killer the boy claimed him to be. A peek under the canvas tarp showed the striped hull of a Chevy Camaro, seemingly used for parts, a common way to profit from stolen cars. They'd have to check the vehicle's status and then move it out. The kid's bike as well. The police photographer, Bill Hare, snapped photos of each item before stepping aside for the forensics unit. The crime scene processors took dirt and lime samples and lifted fingerprints from several locations. Items were packaged as potential evidence. Around 6:30 p.m., word arrived that the Camaro appeared to be stolen, and the bike belonged to 13-year-old James Dramala, a boy reported missing nearly a week earlier. Another missing boy, and not one Henley had named. With the other 3, this made 4 possible graves, maybe 5, since Gregory Malley-Winkle had gone missing with David Hillegeist in 1971. It seemed impossible. Who'd ever heard of a guy grabbing and killing several boys without anyone noticing? Still doubtful, detectives directed 2 inmates they'd brought from a jail, trustees, to dig into the smelly dirt hump near the broken rake. The air had cleared somewhat, but it was blazing hot outside, with a dampness that stuck shirts to skin. The trustees started to dig. 8 inches below the surface, they hit a layer of white lime. A few strokes with the shovel revealed a piece of thick, transparent plastic. As they moved the sandy earth away, they smelled it before they saw it. The swollen, nude body of a blond boy, wrapped in plastic and lying on his right side. From his size, they guessed his age to be 12 or 13. Maybe Dramala? White tape bound his feet together. Nervous trustees pulled the bundle from the hole and carried it out past Henley. Encased in muck near the hole's foot end, the diggers uncovered a deteriorated green plastic bag containing a skeleton. The victim had been in a crouched position when placed in the bag. It seemed that Henley was right. This place was a private burial ground. The detectives called for more resources. They weren't going anywhere for a while. The trustees grumbled. They disliked this job. One vomited outside. But they had to keep digging. There was a lot of ground to cover in a stall this size. The officers called for floodlights and large fans. They hauled the Camaro out. Once the second set of remains was removed, the diggers located a spot under the grimy blue rug that showed signs of disturbance. Beneath a layer of lime, they unearthed a piece of plywood, 6 feet long and a foot wide. It seemed to be a marker. They pulled it out and dug deeper until they located 2 partially decomposed victims, wrapped in thick plastic and bound with rope. Both victims lay on their left sides, against each other head to foot, seemingly killed and buried at the same time. Possibly, these were Marty Jones and Charles Cobble, whose disappearance cops had dismissed 2 weeks before as boys just running away. No effort had been made to look for them. The official excuse had been that so many teenage boys left Houston these days, there seemed little reason to waste the resources. Jones and Cobble were buddies. They'd vanished on the same day. Ergo, they'd left together. Yet they were 2 of several boys that had gone missing since 1971 from a neighborhood known as the Houston Heights. Half a dozen had attended the same junior high school. This alone should have triggered serious questions, especially when their parents had all raised a ruckus over the lack of police response. None had believed their boys had run off. Every cop in that hot, smelly stall that night probably knew there'd be hell to pay for this oversight. They now had 4 bodies, the number Henley had stated. They could call it quits, but they knew there might be more. There might also be other evidence buried here, or items that could help to identify these kids. They had to keep probing. The next hole, dug where the Camaro had sat, produced a skull and some bones. Underneath them was another plastic-wrapped set of remains so decomposed the cops couldn't determine in which direction the arms and legs were lying. That made 6 victims. According to crime writer Jack Olson, some officers felt sickened when the landlady came over to watch and told them Corll had recently asked for another stall because he was running out of space. Ambulances transported the remains to the Harris County morgue. Mulligan watched Henley smoke a cigarette. The kid had stopped a killer, just like he'd said. And if he hadn't, he and his friends might have been dumped in here as well, with Corll continuing his killings for who knows how long. Several reporters arrived. Some spotted the long-haired, acne-prone boy at the center of this unfolding horror story. He looked no more than 14, short and skinny, hardly a kid who could cause all this trouble. Henley alternated between weeping and assuring his guard he was okay. He complained of a headache. He wanted to call his mother. He'd been asking for hours to talk to her. Police beat reporter Jack Cato from KPRC TV spotted an opportunity. He offered Henley the use of his car phone. Henley accepted. It was a deal with the devil. Cato filmed the team without his permission as he leaned against a red Mustang and broke the news to his mother, Mary Henley. The audio recording of her shock over her son's revelation was broadcast on television. Henley's voice trembled as he said, "Mama?" "Yes, this is Mama, baby." A brief pause. "I killed Dean." He put his hand to his face. "Wayne?" She sounded stunned. "Oh, Wayne, you didn't." "Yep, yes'm." "Oh, God, where are you?" She started to cry. He told her he was at Corll's warehouse. When she asked if she could come, he said it was okay, but then detectives directed him to tell her no. They knew he was a juvenile, and a parent should be present, but they didn't want her silencing him. She might even bring a lawyer. Henley assured her he was all right. "I'm with the police." He'd see her later. On his own, Henley mumbled about how he knew some of the boys and had introduced them to Corll. "It's my fault." Cato asked for an on-camera interview, but Henley didn't want to be filmed. Cato managed to record some strained words from him while the camera person focused on the fans pumping the reek of decomposition out of the stall. A reporter for Channel 11 persuaded Henley to talk face-to-face for the late broadcast. The boy admitted he'd known Corll for a while, about 2 years. They liked to drink beer together. He said Corll had talked about an organization involved in all this, one that had paid him thousands of dollars. But the kid seemed to have some doubts, because Corll's lifestyle didn't show much for his supposed association. The reports were now airing on televisions all over town. Henley had given his mother no idea of what she was about to see, she and her neighbors. Some were the parents of the boys being removed from Corll's boat stall, parents Mary Henley had previously comforted when the boys had disappeared. "I couldn't believe it," Mary said. "That wasn't my little Wayne. He didn't do things like that. He loved everybody." At the age of 5, she recalled, he'd walked down the aisle at church and declared his intention to become a minister. Until recently, he'd carried a Bible in his shirt pocket. He was a good kid. Mary knew he'd been upset lately. He'd said things so strange she'd made an appointment with a psychiatrist. She remembered Corll telling her just 2 weeks earlier that he planned to take her son traveling to where she couldn't contact him. Bristling, she'd warned Corll if he tried it, she'd send the police after him. "He must have done something terrible," Mary stated, "for Wayne to have killed him." This case was barreling toward revelations far more shocking than the fatal shooting of Dean Corll. Henley acted surprised as he watched body bags being removed from the boat shed. He'd known about 4, and had suspected 1 or 2 more, but it seemed that Corll had secrets even darker than he'd realized. And he knew there were burial sites elsewhere, too. He'd initially intended to show police only this much, but the pressure to tell everything leaked out in several of Henley's comments. "I can't help but feel guilty, like I done killed those boys myself," he lamented to one officer. "I caused them to be dead. I led them straight to Dean." The officer told Henley he should feel lucky. He might have ended up here, too. Henley hid his face in his hands. He knew he deserved no consolation. He should have killed Corll much earlier, or should have gone to the police. He'd made several plans to get away, but nothing he'd tried had worked. His weakness shamed him. There had been pivotal moments when he could have done the right thing, but each time he'd surrendered to whatever Corll had wanted. Around 10 p.m., Mulligan sent Henley back to the jail in Pasadena, the town where he'd fatally shot Dean Corll. Mulligan believed they no longer needed Henley's help. He'd soon realize that this nightmare was only just beginning. Hole number 4, back in the right corner, produced 2 more bodies buried close together. It appeared that several kids had been dumped on top of one another. Under the 7th set of remains, the diggers found a suede jacket with long fringes, a knotted rope, and a piece of blue terry cloth. The 8th murdered boy had been buried sitting up, seemingly bound with a piece of parachute cord. Nothing about this scene seemed real. People didn't just kill kids and bury them in a boat stall. Who was this Dean Corll? After midnight, the exhausted detectives called it quits. They weren't done, but everyone needed a break. The stench and the heat overwhelmed them. Some of the trustees showed signs of trauma. No one had expected to be here this long. A routine trip to check an unlikely report had evolved into a major case with multiple bodies. So far, they'd dug holes near 2 walls and in the stall's center. There were many more areas to explore. The age of some of the remains suggested they'd been here a while. A crowd of reporters shouted into cameras for TV news about the gruesome discoveries. The parents of missing boys hung on every word as they called one another. Jack Olson depicted them as enraged over how the Houston police had declared their missing sons runaways. Mary Henley later recalled for reporters that she'd sat frozen in the home she shared with her mother, Christine Weed, and her 3 younger sons. She'd known that Elmer Wayne had been close with Corll for a year and a half. He'd tried to tell her he was in trouble. She hadn't listened. She could only hope that what she was witnessing now would all get sorted out. It had to. She wanted desperately to see her eldest son, to have him explain what this was all about, but she couldn't just go running out to find him. At this late hour, she doubted she'd be allowed to see her son. For her, it was a sleepless, agonizing night. Henley, too, had a fitful night in his bare jail cell. He hallucinated a woman entering with a dog. Then an elderly black woman seemed to be taking pictures of him. He panicked at the intrusion. He couldn't get warm. Disoriented, he shook uncontrollably. The following day dawned just as sweltering as the day before. More bodies were exhumed, some of them with items of clothing, such as bathing suits, shoes, and belts. The medical examiner's team began the work of giving them names. ID cards for a pair of missing brothers attested to their fates. HPD Detective Carl Siebeneicher looked in horror at the remains of Marty Jones, his murdered cousin. But other identifications would be harder. TV crews filmed the grisly business of pulling up plastic-wrapped, decomposed bodies and carrying them to the waiting transport vehicles. In a couple of cases, there was evidence of genital mutilation. In one hole, the skeletal remains of 2 boys had commingled, making it difficult to tell which parts belonged to which kid. Over the next few days, the Houston mass murders would become the largest case of criminal multicide thus far in the history of the United States. The Predator. The pressing question for public safety officials was how so many kids had gone missing from the same Houston neighborhood within the span of a few years without prompting a full-scale investigation. Also, how had a seemingly nice man like Dean Corll, called the Candy Man by kids who'd adored him, done the things Henley described? And how had an ordinary teen like Wayne Henley been involved? The story took shape as police and prosecutors scrambled to piece together an official narrative. They ran down multiple leads and ignored those they couldn't pursue due to vague information or lack of resources. Ultimately, they offered a simple but incomplete story of a sexual predator and murderer operating in a limited area. This narrative has...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?